They looked like a normal family. From the outside at least. A modest house in the suburbs. A little garden out front. A family car that had seen better days. Mark, the father, had once been a promising financial analyst. Lily, his wife, stayed at home to care for their son, Ethan. Ethan had cerebral palsy. He couldn't walk, couldn't speak clearly, and needed a wheelchair to move around. But he was bright. His eyes were full of understanding, of feeling, and Lily adored him. She saw the soul behind the silence, the kindness in his awkward smile. To her, he was perfect. Mark didn't see it that way. At first, he tried. He held Ethan in his arms when he was born, and for a moment, there was love in his eyes. But as the diagnosis came, and the years went by, that love began to rot. The stress, the bills, the missed promotions, the sideways looks from neighbors, it all built up in him like a pressure cooker. He never hit Ethan, but the way he looked at him, the way he sighed when Lily needed help lifting him, the way he always had something better to do when Ethan needed changing or feeding, it said enough. Mark started drinking in the evenings. Just one beer at first, then two, then whiskey. He'd sit alone in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, while Lily bathed their son upstairs. Sometimes she'd ask for his help, and he'd reply without turning his head. "You're the one who wanted to keep him," he'd mutter. Lily tried to ignore it. She kept loving both of them, believing that stress was to blame. But deep down, she was scared. Scared of what Mark had become. He'd lost his job 2 years ago. Downsizing, they said. But she knew the truth. He'd lashed out at a manager, blamed his mistakes on others. Since then, he'd drifted from job to job, warehouse shifts, delivery gigs. But nothing stuck. Money got tight, very tight. Medical expenses, therapy, rent. They couldn't keep up. Mark blamed Ethan openly. Now, once, during a cold morning, as he saw Lily wrapping a blanket around Ethan's legs, he snapped. "If we didn't have that burden, we wouldn't be drowning like this. You think this is living?" Lily didn't respond. She just looked at him, hollow and tired, and walked away. There were nights when Mark stood by the window, smoking, watching the cars pass on the road outside, and something dark crept into his thoughts. He thought about freedom, about a life where he didn't have to push a wheelchair, where he didn't have to hear that soft, strained breathing in the next room. He thought about what it would be like to just start over. Ethan, of course, didn't understand the words, but he could feel things. He felt when his mother's hand shook while feeding him. He felt the tension in the air when Mark came home. And sometimes he would flinch for no reason at all, because even though his father had never hit him, fear didn't always need bruises. Lily noticed it all, and every night she would whisper in Ethan's ear before bed, "You are not a burden, you're my miracle." And Ethan would smile, slow and uneven, but real. But the cracks were growing. Mark was changing, and the day was coming when the pressure inside him would break loose, when the anger, the self-pity, the sense of being trapped, would finally push him into something Lily could never have imagined. It was a cloudy Saturday morning when Mark walked into the kitchen with a strange calmness in his eyes. Lily was making oatmeal for Ethan, humming softly, trying to bring some warmth into the house. Ethan was in his wheelchair, smiling faintly at the smell of cinnamon. Mark placed his hand on Lily's shoulder and said he wanted to take Ethan out for some fresh air. Just the two of them. He said it with an unfamiliar softness in his voice, like he was finally trying to bond. Lily looked at him, suspicious at first, but she wanted to believe. Maybe this was a step forward. Maybe Mark was finally trying. She helped him get Ethan dressed, wrapped him in a blanket, kissed her son on the forehead, and whispered her usual words. "You're my miracle." Mark wheeled Ethan out to the car and lifted him into the back with robotic precision. His face was blank, his eyes far away, and his hands trembled slightly as he fastened the straps. He didn't drive to the park. Instead, he took a road that led past the industrial zone, through forgotten streets and empty fields. Eventually, He turned down a gravel path that led to a rarely used train crossing. The wooden beams were worn. The warning lights hadn't worked in years. There were no cameras, no fences, no barriers, only the rusted rails and the silence of open space. He parked the car, lifted Ethan out again. The boy looked up at him with those same trusting eyes, no fear, no idea. Mark wheeled him slowly down the path toward the tracks. A distant bird called. Wind rustled through dry grass. The only sound from Ethan was the soft rhythm of his breathing, shallow and uneven. When they reached the rails, Mark stopped. He locked the brakes on the wheelchair. He stood there for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. His heart pounded so loud, it drowned out everything else. He leaned close and whispered something no one would ever hear. Then he turned and walked away. He didn't run. He didn't look back. He got in the car, started the engine, and drove off with shaking hands. His face was pale, blank, but tears began to form in the corners of his eyes. Real or not, even he didn't know. Somewhere on the tracks behind him, a faint chime of metal echoed through the air, but there was something he didn't notice. As he turned away, his watch, loose on his wrist for months, had slipped off. It fell to the gravel between the tracks, the glass face cracking slightly against a rail. It would lie there unnoticed for hours. When Mark came home, he stumbled through the front door, like a man destroyed. His eyes were red, his hair disheveled, his hands trembling. Lily was startled by the sight of him. He collapsed into a chair, and mumbled that something terrible had happened. We were near the tracks. I looked away for 1 second. He slipped, fell. He slipped, fell. I tried to grab him, but it was too late. The train. His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. The sobs came, loud and broken. He sounded like a man consumed by guilt, but it wasn't the kind Lily imagined. She screamed, collapsed to the floor. The neighbors heard her cries and called the police. Officers arrived quickly, and Mark repeated the story. They'd been near the old tracks. Ethan had fallen. He couldn't save him. The police investigated, but at the scene, there wasn't much left. A few twisted pieces of the wheelchair were found scattered beyond the tracks. No body, no blood, just shattered metal, and a bent wheel. No cameras in the area, no real evidence to contradict the story. One officer picked up something odd, an expensive watch, lying near the rails. The face was cracked, the leather band dusty. He placed it in an evidence bag, without much thought. Lily was inconsolable. Days passed in a fog. She didn't eat, didn't sleep. She just sat in Ethan's room, holding his favorite blanket. Mark played the grieving father well. He spoke at the memorial, shed tears in front of neighbors, clutched photos, as if they were all he had left. But at night, alone in the bathroom, he stared into the mirror, and couldn't meet his own eyes. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't over. Something about that day had felt incomplete, and sometimes, in the silence, he thought he heard a voice, soft, strained, like the breath of someone who should have been gone. The house felt colder after the memorial, not just from grief, but from something else, something heavier. Lily moved through the rooms like a ghost, her eyes hollow, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark acted as if things were slowly returning to normal. He even went back to doing small jobs around the house, whistling tunelessly, trying to fill the silence. But Lily wasn't healing. Something inside her refused to settle. She'd look at Ethan's empty wheelchair in the corner, untouched since that day, and her chest would tighten. It wasn't just sorrow, it was doubt. A strange, gnawing doubt. One evening, about a week after the accident, she went through the laundry to wash Mark's clothes. As she pulled his jacket from the bottom of the hamper, something slipped from the inside pocket and fell to the floor. She bent down and picked it up, and her heart froze. It was Mark's watch. She remembered it clearly, a gift she had given him for their anniversary 3 years ago. He wore it every day, swore it was the only thing that still made him feel like a man. And yet, the police had said the watch was found near the tracks. They hadn't shown her, but they'd mentioned it during their report. She remembered the words exactly. Found an expensive men's watch near the rail line, cracked face. She'll assume it belonged to the boy's father. But now, here it was, uncracked, untouched. She stared at it for a long time, her breath caught in her throat. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. She didn't say anything to Mark. Not yet. Instead, she kept the watch hidden in a drawer in Ethan's room. And for the first time in days, she started paying attention again to the way Mark avoided eye contact, to the way he flinched when she entered the room unexpectedly, to the way he drank less but stared longer at nothing. A few days later, Lily was watching the evening news, half dazed on the couch. She wasn't really listening, until a story caught her ear. It was short, just a 30-second segment. A local woman had reported seeing a man running from a train crossing, moments before a train barreled through. She said he was pushing a wheelchair, and that, at the last second, he yanked a boy out of it. The chair was destroyed, but the child had vanished. The woman said she tried to help, but the man and the boy disappeared into the woods. No one had come forward to confirm the story. Police believed it might have been a misunderstanding. The child's identity was unknown. Lily sat up straight. Her hands were shaking. A wheelchair, a boy, a rescue, but no body. She grabbed her phone and found the full report online. It wasn't much, just a grainy photo of the destroyed wheelchair, some comments from locals, and a vague police statement. But one detail stood out. The crossing was the same one where Mark had taken Ethan, the same spot. The timeline matched. Everything matched, except Mark's story. Her breath caught. Her chest burned. Could it be? Could Ethan still be alive? She confronted Mark that night. But she didn't accuse him directly. She only asked questions, ones he didn't want to answer. How did Ethan fall? Why were you at that crossing? Did you really try to save him? Mark got defensive, angry, then quiet. You're just grieving, he said. You want to believe in a miracle, but he's gone. Lily, you need to let go. But she couldn't. Not anymore. The watch. The news. His eyes. It was all unraveling. That night, while Mark slept in the bedroom, Lily packed a small bag. She took the watch, the printed article, and a photo of Ethan. She didn't tell him she was leaving. She just walked out the door and didn't look back. She filed for divorce 2 weeks later. Mark didn't fight it. He barely reacted. Lily moved into a friend's spare room and started her own investigation. She called the witness from the news report, an older woman named Grace who lived near the tracks. Grace confirmed everything. The boy looked disabled. She said. The man seemed scared. Not abusive, but like he was running from something. Then they were gone. I thought maybe I imagined it, but I swear that child was alive. That was enough. Lily printed flyers, contacted local shelters, searched online forums for missing children or unusual sightings. She called hospitals, churches, even old friends she hadn't spoken to in years. No one had seen Ethan. But she believed, with everything in her heart, she believed. She told the police her theory. They listened politely, promised to follow up. But they didn't believe her. No body meant no case. Mark's story made enough sense on paper. Her grief, they said, was blinding her. But Lily knew. A mother always knows. And she wasn't going to stop until she found him. Lily's world had shrunk to a single room. A small apartment above a laundromat, barely big enough to fit a mattress, a folding table and a worn-out dresser. She worked long hours cleaning offices and motel rooms, taking any shift she could get. Some nights she fell asleep in her uniform, hands raw from bleach, eyes stinging from exhaustion. But no matter how tired she was, she never stopped searching. She had lost everything. Her house, her marriage, most of her friends. Even her parents had begun urging her to move on. to let go of the hope that Ethan might still be alive. But Lily refused. Every spare dollar went into bus fare, posters and ink for her old printer. She plastered Ethan's photo on every notice board in town, grocery stores, clinics, gas stations. Each poster said the same thing. Do you know this boy? He may not remember his name. He may need help. Please call. She visited shelters and group homes regularly, leaving flyers and asking quiet questions. She spoke to social workers, nurses, school administrators. Some listened with sympathy, others with tired eyes. Most promised to call if they heard anything. They never did. The years passed. And still, Lily searched. Meanwhile, Mark's life took a very different path. After the divorce, he left town for good, moved to another state, found a job in a construction company, where he quickly rose to management. Within 5 years he had a house in the suburbs, a new wife named Claire, and a daughter named Emily. To the outside world, Mark was a man who had rebuilt himself, a success story. He rarely spoke of his past, and never mentioned his first son. Claire once asked him about the scar on his wrist, the same wrist where the watch had cut him that day near the tracks. Mark said it was from an accident at work. She never asked again, but Mark hadn't truly escaped. The nightmares began quietly, like whispers in the dark. At first, they were vague. A train horn, a wheelchair rolling backward, a scream. Then they became clearer. He would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that someone was standing in the room. Sometimes he saw Ethan at the foot of his bed, older now, silent, eyes filled with something between sorrow and fury. Other nights, he'd hear a faint voice calling from outside the window, or he'd dream that he was back on the tracks, looking down at his hands, and finding them covered in blood. Claire tried to comfort him, but he brushed her off, said it was just stress, just old trauma. But inside, Mark felt it tightening, a fear that never quite let go. One morning, he found his daughter sitting at the kitchen table, coloring. She looked up and said casually, "Daddy, I saw a boy in my dream last night. He looked like me. He was sad. He said he was looking for you." Mark's heart stopped. He smiled, said something vague, and left for work early. But the moment stuck in his mind like a thorn. He couldn't explain it, couldn't shake it. The dreams kept coming. The guilt, once buried so deep, was clawing its way back up. He avoided mirrors. He avoided news from his old town. And most of all, he avoided thinking about Lily. But Lily thought about him every day, not out of love, not anymore, but because she knew. She knew that Mark had done something monstrous, and somewhere out there, her son might still be alive, paying the price for that crime. There were nights she nearly gave up, times when the silence stretched so long, it felt like the world had forgotten her completely. But then she'd see a boy in a wheelchair at a bus stop, or hear a mother calling her child, Ethan, at the park, and the flame would spark again. She had nothing left, but she still had hope, and that was enough to keep her going. It was a quiet Sunday morning, when the doorbell rang at Mark's house. He was in the kitchen, pouring himself coffee, half listening to his daughter Emily humming in the next room. Claire was still asleep upstairs. The doorbell rang again. This time longer. Persistent. Mark frowned. No one ever came unannounced out here. He opened the door and froze. A teenage boy sat in a wheelchair on the porch. His hair was dark and messy, his arms thin, but his eyes, those gray-blue eyes, were unmistakable. Behind him stood a man in uniform, a police officer, not in a patrol outfit, but in the jacket of a missing persons unit. The officer nodded politely. "Mr. Harrington, my name is Officer Jacobs. I work with the Cold Case Division in Monroe County. We believe this young man is your son. He was found last month in a shelter in the Northern District. No ID, but he gave us a name. Ethan." Mark's grip on the doorframe tightened. He had practiced this moment in his nightmares for years, but no rehearsal could prepare him for the real thing. The boy was older now. 14, maybe 15. His hands trembled slightly on the wheels of his chair, and his voice was quiet when he spoke. "You left me. On the tracks." The words were simple, but they hit Mark like a hammer. He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Everything inside him collapsed. The officer looked between them, a little confused. We tried to piece together his past. He was moved through several group homes under a false name, but he kept describing the same thing. Train tracks, a wheelchair, and someone walking away. We didn't know what to make of it, until we ran a facial age progression, and matched it to an old photo of your son. We contacted your ex-wife. She's on her way. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Lily's car pulled up behind the officer's vehicle. She stepped out slowly, clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And then she saw him. She didn't need a DNA test. Didn't need a confirmation. Her heart knew. Ethan. She ran to the porch and dropped to her knees beside the wheelchair, tears spilling down her face. Ethan's eyes lit up, uncertain at first, then overwhelmed. He raised his hand, and Lily took it in both of hers, pressing it to her cheek. "Mom. I knew you'd come." They stayed like that for a moment, the world fading away. Mark didn't move. Claire had come down the stairs now, holding Emily by the hand. She looked from the officer to the boy to her husband's ashen face. "Mark, what's going on?" He said nothing. Ethan finally turned toward him again. "You thought I'd die there. But someone pulled me off the tracks. I don't remember their face. Just the smell of smoke. A strong hand. They carried me out before the train came. I woke up in a hospital. No name. No voice for weeks. But I remembered you. Your eyes when you walked away." Lily looked up sharply at Mark, her expression unreadable. So it was true. Everything she had feared, everything she had suspected, it was real. The officer spoke gently. "This is not an arrest. Not yet, but there will be a full investigation." Ethan's statements match a very old unsolved file. And now with him alive, everything changes. "You may want to contact legal counsel." Ethan's voice cut through the air. "Steady now. You don't get to hide anymore, Dad. This isn't over." Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. His perfect life, his house, his career, his second chance, was crumbling like dust beneath his feet. And all he could see were the eyes of the boy he had tried to erase from existence, now returned. Not as a memory, but as a witness. Mark tried to pretend everything was under control, that it was all just a misunderstanding, a confused boy, a tragic past, a memory twisted by trauma, but the world didn't buy it. Not when the investigation began in earnest. The clock had started ticking the moment Officer Jacobs filed the formal report. Old files were pulled from archives. Photos of a destroyed wheelchair near a railway crossing, dated and time-stamped. Witness testimonies re-examined. A railroad worker who'd always claimed something felt off that day. He remembered seeing a man walking away in the distance, but it never made it into the official notes. And then there was the watch. The watch Mark claimed to have lost years ago. Now photographed, logged, and matched to pictures from family albums. A luxury brand, custom engraving. Lily had even gifted it to him on their 5th anniversary. It had been found near the tracks, buried just beneath the gravel, and now it was evidence. Mark's attempts to spin the story collapsed quickly. First came the suspension from his firm pending investigation, they said. Then local news caught the story. A respected businessman, possibly involved in the abandonment of his disabled son a decade ago. Headlines were brutal, the internet even worse. Claire confronted him in tears. "You told me he died. You told me he fell." Mark couldn't answer. The words stuck in his throat. She packed her things and left with Emily that night. Within a week, he was under official investigation for attempted murder and child abandonment. The statute of limitations was a murky subject. The law wasn't built to handle cases like this. But public opinion didn't care about legal nuance. His reputation, his network, his money, it all started vanishing faster than he could grasp. Lily, meanwhile, stayed quiet. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't speak to reporters. Her only focus was Ethan. They moved into a small rented place, closer to the coast. Ethan had to relearn parts of himself, his story, his body, his voice. But he was stronger than anyone expected. One night, sitting by the window while Lily folded laundry, he spoke. "I'm not here to destroy him, Mom." Lily paused. "I know, sweetheart." Ethan looked down at his hands. They were shaking less these days. "I just want to live. I want to study. I want people to know that I exist, that I have a name, a family, and that what happened was real." Lily crossed the room and sat beside him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and he leaned into her touch. "You do have a name. You have me. And no one can ever take that away again." He nodded. "I don't want him punished because I hate him. I just want the truth to mean something. The trial, if it came, would be long and complicated." Legal experts debated whether a conviction was possible, given the years that had passed. But the moral verdict had already been cast. Mark lost his standing, his family, and any shred of dignity he had left. He never apologized, never once asked to see Ethan. Perhaps he couldn't face him, or perhaps he knew that nothing he could say would erase what he had done. For Ethan, healing came in slow waves. Therapy, school, even a few new friends. He still had scars on his body and deeper inside. But he had something else now too. Hope. And the truth. Ethan never returned to his old name. To him that name had always been attached to pain, to silence, to a childhood cut short by fear and betrayal. Instead he chose something new. Elian. It meant light in an old language. He liked the way it sounded. Like someone who had made it through something dark, and was still moving forward. Lily supported the change immediately. "If it helps you feel more like yourself, then it's yours," she said simply. They filed the papers quietly. No fanfare, just a signature, a stamp, and a deep breath. Around that time, a non-profit organization that worked with survivors of childhood trauma reached out. One of their board members had heard Ethan's story through a local reporter. They offered him a full scholarship, therapy, equipment, even a mentor, a former athlete who had lost mobility after an accident and rebuilt his life from scratch. Elian said yes without hesitation. He and Lily moved again, this time to a better neighborhood, a modest apartment, but clean and filled with light. He started school in the fall, rolling into campus with a new wheelchair and a fire in his chest. He was nervous, but he was ready. People asked questions, of course. "What happened to you? Where are your parents?" He never lied. "I had a rough start," he would say, "but I got lucky. Someone found me. And someone else never gave up." He didn't say his father's name. Not once. It didn't deserve a place in his future. One day, during a student panel, he was invited to speak about resilience. He hesitated at first, but then he thought of all the years he had been silent. He sat at the front of the hall, microphone in hand, and said, "Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you don't. Sometimes they're the ones who hurt you. But that doesn't mean the world is empty. There's always someone out there who'll fight for you. My mom did. And because of her I'm here." The room was quiet after that. Then someone clapped. Then everyone did. Lily sat in the back wiping her eyes. She remembered the nights spent stapling flyers to telephone poles, the long rides to shelters, the closed doors, the pitying glances, and now, this. Her son, standing not on his feet, but on his truth. Elian became a quiet presence on campus. Not loud, not showy, but when someone needed help, he was there. He joined an accessibility committee, helped redesign a ramp for the older buildings, talked to professors about invisible barriers. He never said much, but when he did, people listened. And in quiet moments, late at night, he would sometimes dream of the railway tracks, of the sound of metal, the cold air, but he always woke up in his own bed. next to a desk covered in books, with the sound of his mother making tea in the kitchen. One evening, Lily sat beside him on the small balcony. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked. Elian nodded slowly. "Not with hate though, more like desiring. I wonder what he sees when he looks in the mirror now." Lily didn't reply right away. Then she said, "He sees what he chose to become, but you're still becoming." He smiled. "I guess I am." They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the buildings, the sky turning from gold to deep blue. "A name can be a wound," he had once said, but now, it was something else. A beginning.